contradiction. Well, I would disagree with James, because something that James isn't working with yet is language philosophy. I mean, he's mentioned it, of course, a little bit. He's familiar. He speaks German, he speaks French, he speaks English, he speaks Latin, Greek, but and perhaps Spanish, because he spent 6 months in Brazil. Actually, that would be Portuguese, right? But the language turn hasn't happened yet, and that's going to come, as I guess, in our very last couple of classes. We'll be talking about that. And so James isn't aware of that, and it strikes me that if he had been able to see that, he would realize that under different contexts, what is a contradiction in this one doesn't appear to be a contradiction in this context. So if you take it out of one linguistic environment and totally into another, the contradiction that's in that environment stays a contradiction. That's something that we definitely get from Einstein and theory of relativity, right? The change for Einstein is when you go from one context to another. Inside the context, there are laws and truths. That's, I think, the difficult stage to understand, that when they're talking about this kind of development, a postmodern view, a lot of folks don't realize that you have to be in a completely different context for that kind of sense to make. And that's clearly where Hegel is talking, right? You know, that in a totally different sense, this perspective isn't seeing everything that this perspective is seeing, right? So, you have to get out of that perspective to see the other perspective. And by the way, I think that's a problem with the woke are today. A lot of the people that seem to be promoting the idea of woke or wokeism are not understanding the difference between the contexts, and they're feeling like, well, you can't teach math. That's a colonialism to impose mathematics on people. No, that's just the way science works. You need math. That's not part of some sort of colonial oppressive nature out there, right? If you want stuff to work, you actually have to do math, and then you have to learn it if you want to be a participant in that kind of society. And that's not a cultural oppression, that somehow you should change society so that you don't have to learn to do math and so on. Am I making fun of that? I don't know if you're interested in that or not. But these are, I think, the conflicts between their appreciation of Hegel and the contemporary Hegelians. When you read about the contemporary Hegelians, they don't really seem to get it. And James is responding to them. Royce I really like. And I think you will enjoy his writings. I mean, it is from the 1870s, 1880s. He was 10 years younger, I believe, than James. But nonetheless, writing still, of course, in that same way. But the varieties of the religious experience, James gives this lecture in response to Royce's The Sources of Religious Thought. I think that was the title of his book. Let me double check. They're both on the web, by the way. I think it's Religious Freedom, actually. Or Religious Insight. Sources of Religious Insight. James will argue that our religious experiences are part of our emotional requirements. We need to have a meta-narrative that explains why we're here. That's clearly a theme for me in the whole class. Remember, the idea of what philosophy is trying to answer for us is, who am I? What's my place in this universe? and how do I maintain my place? In other words, what's the story that I'm in that enables me to have a sense of values and an understanding of what I should be doing and so on, right? And the crises that his father went through and that he went through and two of his brothers went through and his sister went through all seemed to be this kind of crisis, whether it was also a biological problem associated with the whole family having this bipolar problem, could very well be, but it's also brought on clearly by learning something that contradicts what you used to believe as a kid and thinking that, oh, that's the whole point of life, and then all of a sudden finding out there is no Santa Claus. Whoa! Right? You know, what a shock that is to the young person, right? You know, or the young person that suddenly discovers that the tooth fairy. How many of you believe in the tooth fairy? Don't, you're laughing. It's like you don't believe in the tooth fairy. You know, when the tooth fairy is really important is when that child that you have loses their first tooth. And the child is crying because there's blood gushing out of their mouth, and they know that's not supposed to happen, right? You don't necessarily faint from it, although I guess some people do. But you know, as the blood is coming out, the mom comes and stuffs the towel or whatever into the mouth to stop the bleeding, and laughs and says wonderful things about, wow, now you can put that tooth under your pillow, and the tooth fairy will come and give you money for this. And that narrative works, because the child suddenly will completely forget the whole problem of the tooth and just think about that money. They're going to get money for that tooth. And of course, you know, the money shows up, and they're actually convinced that there's a tooth fairy that came and put money in that envelope. I think I showed you the Greek comedian that said his mother screwed up the tooth fairy, right? Wrote a check for $10. I know what's going on. You're embezzling, the tooth fairy is embezzling money from you. But your problem, of course, is the next tooth. You know, you have to put another whatever, and you have to keep, maybe that goes up, I don't know, depending on the tooth. And then you get the next one, and so on and so forth. Until eventually the child comes to you and knows you're the tooth fairy. That's a little traumatic for some of the kids. What's the quiz question for today? How do pragmatism and utilitarianism differ? They're clearly related. Is it just the British call it utilitarianism and we call it pragmatism? Or is there a difference? Questions? Lots more to talk about. It's really quite interesting. We'll continue on with pragmatism next class, and we'll focus on John Dewey and the impact he has on education.
Thank you.
Be careful out there.
Almost died coming in.
I have these humongous cleats that the university, if you haven't got them yet, I don't know if they still have them, but the library gives out free cleats. You just have to show your ID, and they will give you these cleats. There's a variety of types, and that's exactly what we need today with the way the ice is out there. Going up there?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have to turn everything off. I did a better job today on